Okay, so how do they say this? I was shook. I'm shook. It's that thing. But anyhow, what I'm trying to say is when you hold a book like this, or when you read a book like this by such a phenomenal writer, you can't help but be moved by the words and by the reality that she paints. I'm talking about Octavia Butler and her book Kindred, which was suggested in a book club that I follow. And having read this, it was more like a dream come true because I heard so much about Octavia Butler and her influence on readers of fantasy and on writers especially. Octavia Butler writes in Kindred the story of Dana, a black living in the 1970s, and a white husband. And by some twist, she's thrown back more than a half century to the past, to antebellum black plantation in Maryland. And she doesn't understand why, she doesn't understand how. But after the first instance, when this happens, and you guessed right, this is just the first of many instances where she would be thrown back and forth in time. At that first instance, she saves a little boy who is called Rufus, and she doesn't understand the tie because every time she goes back in time, she goes back to exact points in place and time in which Rufus exists. And without giving so much away, the book tells the story of course, slavery and its harsh realities. Now, you wouldn't guess it, but Rufus, who is a white boy at that first instance, is actually tied to Dana by ancestry. Now, so much or so many dilemmas unfold in the course of Dana's trip back and forth in time. And even at one point, she goes back with her husband, who comes face to face with Dana's reality, living as a black. And even in that past, where she didn't have as many privileges as she would in 1970, he faces the very harsh situation of being discriminated or being underrated, and he comes face to face with Dana's circumstance, and in some ways very necessary circumstance of being put in a less than dignified scenario as a slave. And now Kindred, which is you could call a fantasy, but kind of breaks the boundaries of that definition, and so it's not exactly accurate. It's not 100% accurate to call it fantasy. Sometimes you might call it a historical novel, but when time travel comes into the mix, then it becomes something else. However, this is not where the beauty of the book really lies. It lies in the quality and the impact of Octavia's writing. And I'll dig a little bit deeper into this, because for me that was really the essence, and that was really the driver of the feeling and the substance of the story of this book. In Kindred, we follow several characters who play a very important part in this story. We have Rufus, who is Dana's great grandfather. We have Kevin Franklin, who is Dana's husband. We have Tom, who is Rufus' father, which makes him, and he is a plantation owner as well, which makes him Dana's great grandfather, something like that. But if you're keeping count, let me know. And then we have people who fall on the sides. We have Alice, who is a slave girl, but plays an important role as well. When you read it, you find out. The story opens with Dana being in a hospital, waking up in a hospital, having lost an arm. And she's being interrogated by the police, and suspicion that she's a victim of domestic violence. And of course, we know this is not the case, because soon after, the story begins to unfold of all the events that lead up to that moment. Now, Octavia Butler herself has said that the germ for this story came when a schoolmate of hers posed a question: what if you could go back in time and kill all the slave masters? But hold on, what if that circle, if we were to expand it, included all your ancestors who ever enabled or played a part in enabling, enabled slave trade in whatever way? And if that circle included your great grandfather or great great grandfather, would you do the needful? And again, but if you were to stretch this theory, would you even exist if you killed your great 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 grandfather? By necessity, perhaps. So we begin to appreciate how Octavia tackles this theory in this book. And when you read it, you begin to find yourself face to face with certain realities or certain lessons. So to start with, Octavia writes this story in a very descriptive manner. And I think the substance or the quality of the language that she uses here, the style which she writes, is really but not just being descriptive or by necessity narrative, but the thrust or her objective is really to subject us to the psychological pain that Dana faces. So without the luxury of being flowery in her language and distracting us from this very much needed reality check, or even being faced with reality, the reality that she wants us to confront and interrogate, what she does and succeeds in doing exceedingly well is in putting us right in the middle of the slave era. And not just that, because then of course it would be just a descriptive task, but she puts us through the torture of actually watching the evil of slavery. And she does this, and this is why I said she was very, she tackled this excellently well. The language in which you use to tell that story or able to put someone in that scenario or in that imaginarium really matters. And I think this is how Octavia does this very well. So when you read, you don't just read that this happened, but you read and you begin to feel how and when as it happens. And another thing that Octavia does in this book through her characters, and again I believe that this book was really character driven. There is the plot, of course, but by being character driven or being progressed through the characters, she's able to use dialogue to tell us a little bit more about the personalities in this book. So in that way, we are able to feel deeply what it means to be Dana, what it means to be Rufus in some ways, or Alice, but also to be Kevin, who goes through some trauma through the process of that time travel. And this is why I started off by saying I was shook, because when someone does this very well, you can't but come out of this experience with scars. And I think I came out with just enough to be here, to be able to tell you, don't read it if you don't have a good stomach. There's no gore, but I believe to a large extent, when you live through certain experiences, you don't come out at the end of it or the other end the same. And I'm really grateful for Octavia, God rest her soul, for this piece of story that she has shared with the world. I also want to point out that in a way that this book differs from a regular memoir, which I also believe that this book, because again, just as it's in so many ways defies the 100% definition or very definite definition of fantasy, in that it reads as a historical novel, it reads as a memoir, which I believe some elements of Octavia's life and history actually played in the story. One last thing, in telling the story of Dana in Kindred, I believe that Octavia was able to deliver to us characters that were well-rounded. You felt their pains, you felt their history, you felt their triumphs, you felt their heartaches, you felt their pain. And she doesn't do this with just one character, she does it with several. We are able to live their lives just as if they were ours, and this again adds to the beauty of this book. Let me know if you've read any of Octavia Butler's books. I'm also excited, just a side note, because of course, you know how much I like to not just read a book but also research it. But I've also come to hear that, or come to know that, Nnedi Okorafor is also going to be involved in the development of a few of Octavia Butler's books into movies. I'm very excited about that. I haven't seen the movie adaptation, sorry, the TV adaptation of Kindred itself, which is loosely based on the book. At maybe some point I'll read it, but presently I am not compelled to. But I, however, really excited about the other books written by Octavia Butler. Parable of the Sower is another one that I really like to look into, and especially knowing that there are some Nigerian cultural elements, names, or even histories, or whatever in that book, and I'm really excited about that. I am really glad that I got a chance to read this. So far I haven't even shared these views with my friends in the book club, but I hope to. I'm looking forward to hearing their ideas, their thoughts on the book and all its beauty and all its glory. But until I do so, please let me know what you think about the book if you've read it. If you haven't read it, please get a copy and enjoy. And until I see you in the next video, please subscribe, like, and comment. See you.